Okay, check this out. I am not gonna lie. When I first saw this crossover, I thought I knew exactly where it was going. Riddick, the Necromongers, the UNSC Infinity, Deep Space Nine. So naturally, I'm expecting a giant space war. Instead, this story asks a way more dangerous question. What happens when the leader of a galaxy-conquering empire finally finds the thing his entire civilization has been searching for and discovers they may have been wrong all along? And trust me, by the time this story is over, the biggest weapon in the galaxy isn't a fleet, it's the truth. Let's get into it.
The signal had been broadcasting for 6 hours before anyone on the colony understood what it meant. Not because it was complex. Because it was in no language that human civilization had developed in 4,000 years of recorded history. And the specific quality of it, the rhythm, the repetition, the mathematical structure underneath the unfamiliar phonemes, was the structure of something that was not asking a question. It was making an announcement. Kepler's landing had been established 3 years after the Covenant War ended. 42,000 people on a frontier world that had been surveyed, cleared and settled with the specific optimism of a species that had nearly been exterminated and had survived and was, in the aftermath of survival, doing what species did when the immediate threat receded: building. The colony had agricultural infrastructure, a small manufacturing base, a medical facility that served 11 surrounding settlements, and a governor named Reyes, who had been in her position for 18 months and had handled 2 severe weather events, a supply chain disruption, and a political dispute over water rights, with the specific competence of someone who had trained for every possible crisis. She had not trained for this one. She stood at the colony's communication array and listened to the signal and looked at her analyst. And her analyst looked back at her with the expression of someone who had been running the translation algorithm for 4 hours and had nothing. "It's not Covenant," he said. "Not any variant, not Forerunner derived, not in any database we have access to." Reyes looked at the sky. It was still clear, still the specific pale blue of a frontier world with slightly less atmospheric density than Earth standard, the kind of sky that made settlers feel like they were somewhere genuinely new. "How long until they reach visual range?" she said. "At current approach velocity." He checked the display. 11 minutes. She activated the distress beacon. Then she looked at the sky for the remaining 11 minutes, because looking at the sky was the only thing left to do. And because some part of her understood that what was coming deserved to be watched rather than hidden from. The Armada did not arrive like a fleet. It arrived like a horizon. The ships did not appear one at a time, or in formation, or in the organized geometry of a military force executing a planned approach. They filled the sky the way weather filled the sky, not as individual objects, but as a totality, a presence, the specific visual of something that had been marching for so long that marching was not what it did, but what it was. The scale of it made the math wrong. The human eye, calibrated for objects that existed at human scale, kept trying to resolve individual ships into things it could process and kept failing because the ships were too large and too numerous and too close together for individual resolution to be meaningful. The shadow reached the colony first, not metaphorically. The combined mass of the Armada's leading edge blocked the sun across a 200-kilometer footprint, and Kepler's landing went from pale blue afternoon to specific gray twilight in the time it took the shadow's leading edge to cross the colony's perimeter. 42,000 people looked up. In the Armada's command ship, the largest vessel in the fleet, designed not for speed but for presence, built to be the first thing a civilization saw and the last thing it forgot. Richard B. Riddick stood at the forward observation deck and looked at the colony below. He had been Lord Marshal for 4 months. The title felt the way a poorly fitted weapon felt. Functional, present, not made for his hands. The observation deck gave him the full visual of the approach. The fleet spreading across the sky above the colony. The deployment of the conversion platforms from the secondary vessels. The specific organized motion of a civilization that had been doing this for centuries and had refined it into something that looked, from sufficient altitude, almost ceremonial. Lord Vaco stood at his right. Vaco's expression was the expression he always had during approach. Not cruelty, not satisfaction in the conventional sense, but something that was harder to argue with than either of those. Genuine faith. The specific quality of a man watching something he believed in being enacted, the way a doctor looked at a procedure they had performed 1,000 times and still believed in. Kepler's landing, Vaco said. His voice carried the formal register he used for conquest narration, not performance, liturgy, human colony. 42,000 souls. They will be received. Riddick looked at the conversion platforms deploying below. The platforms were not weapons. That was the specific horror of them. They were not weapons, they were not bombs. They did not destroy the colony's infrastructure or kill the colonists or leave the kind of damage that a military engagement left. They landed in the colony's open spaces with the precision of long practice and deployed their equipment with the efficiency of a process that had been optimized over centuries. The conversion process had a name in Necromonger theology, the half-dead transformation. The theological literature described it as a gift, the reduction of pain, the diminishment of fear, the liberation from the biological tyranny of mortality. The Lord Marshal's theology said that the half-dead existed in a state closer to the Underverse than the fully living, that the transformation was the first step toward the transcendence the fleet was marching toward. What it looked like from the observation deck was colonists being changed, not killed, changed. The people who walked into the conversion platforms walked out of them differently. The movement wrong, the posture wrong, the specific quality of presence that a human being had in space altered in a way that was visible even from altitude. They were still alive. Their biological functions were intact. Their memories, their faces, their bodies, all present. But the thing that had made them themselves was gone. Vaco watched this with the expression of a man watching salvation. Riddick watched it with the expression of a man watching something he could not stop, and was calculating at every available moment whether this was the moment he could redirect the machine without the machine destroying itself and everything near it in the process. Another world received, Vaco said. The words carried the specific warmth of genuine belief. Riddick looked at the colony below, at the 42,000 people who were right now in the process of becoming something else, at the conversion platforms operating with their terrible efficiency. Another world gone, he said. The distinction between those two sentences was the entire war he was fighting, not with weapons, not with armies, but inside the command structure of a fleet that had been running for centuries on the momentum of a faith he had never shared, toward a destination he could not verify, under a title he had taken by killing the man who wore it before him. Vaco looked at him. The look carried the specific quality of a true believer, encountering a statement that contradicted his framework and choosing, for now, to file it rather than engage it. Vaco was not a fool. He had been managing Riddick since the moment the throne changed hands, with the patience of a man who believed that the Lord Marshal's authority was temporal and the faith's authority was eternal, and that the math therefore resolved in his favor if he waited long enough. He looked back at the colony. The Underverse calls, he said. The liturgical response to doubt. Riddick said nothing. Below them, Kepler's landing continued to be received. The distress beacon reached the UNSC Infinity at 0847 hours. Roland flagged it before the duty officer finished reading the header. Flagged it with the specific priority designation he used for signals that contained information requiring command-level attention immediately rather than through the standard reporting chain. Captain Thomas Lasky came to the bridge, still pulling on his jacket. "Talk to me," he said. Roland's holographic form was at the tactical display, hands moving across the data with the efficiency of an AI for whom processing and presenting were the same continuous action. Distress beacon from Kepler's landing. Frontier colony, 42,000 population, established post-war. He pulled up the approach data. The beacon was preceded by a 6-hour unknown signal broadcast. Origin unknown, language unknown, not in any database including Covenant variants and Forerunner-derived communication records. He looked at Lasky. "Captain, the colony's life sign readings are changing." Lasky looked at the display. "Changing how?" Naughton said carefully. "Changing. The biological signatures are present but altered. The neural activity patterns are shifting from standard human baselines toward." He stopped for a moment. That was not hesitation, but was the specific beat of an AI identifying a category it did not have and needing to create one. Something else. Something I don't have a precedent for. Lasky looked at the long-range sensor data, at the armada filling the sky above the colony. The scale of it hit the display's representation and kept hitting it. The sensor array kept adjusting its scale parameters to fit more ships into the frame and kept running out of frame. many ships, he said. Roland looked at the count. Current estimate, he said, is in excess of 8,000 vessels. I want to be transparent that my counting algorithm is having difficulty with the density of the formation. He looked at Lasky. Captain, this is the largest fleet I have ever processed sensor data for, including Covenant invasion fleets at their peak. The bridge was quiet, with the specific quality of a bridge absorbing something that exceeded its working models. Lasky looked at the colony, at the life sign readings changing in real time, at 8,000 ships. Get me Master Chief, he said, and plot an intercept course. He looked at the Armada on the display. Maximum tactical speed. The Infinity came out of slipspace at Lasky's intercept coordinates, and the Armada was larger in person than it had been on the display. Displays compressed scale in ways that made large things manageable. The actual visual, the Armada hanging in space above Kepler's landing like a second sky made of metal and mass, did not compress. It simply was what it was, which was the largest thing Lasky had seen outside of a halo ring. Roland's analysis had been running continuously since the slipspace jump. His voice in Lasky's earpiece was the voice he used when he was presenting an unfinished picture and needed the captain to understand it was unfinished. The ships are not of any known origin. Hull composition is novel. Their energy signatures suggest propulsion technology I cannot map to any known system. A beat. The conversion equipment currently deployed on Kepler's landing is still active. Life sign alteration is approximately 60% complete across the colony's population. Can we stop it? Lasky said. I don't know what stopping it would require, Roland said. I don't understand the mechanism yet. Lasky looked at the Armada, at the colony below it, at the 40% of 42,000 people who were still themselves. Master Chief came onto the bridge with the specific quality of presence that Spartan eyes had in rooms. Not aggressive, not performed. The simple physical fact of a being who had been built for situations that exceeded normal parameters and who had been in enough of them that the excess had become his baseline. He looked at the display. He looked at it with the economy of assessment that 30 years of combat had built into him. The specific scan of a soldier who needed to understand a tactical situation and had learned to extract the essential from the available in the time most people took to register that the available was overwhelming. Ground deployment, he said. Not a question. The conversion equipment, Roland said. Yes. Chief looked at the Armada. The ships aren't the primary threat, he said. Not right now. The equipment on the ground is. Agreed, Lasky said. But engaging the ground equipment means operating under that. He looked at the Armada. All of that. Chief looked at the Armada, at 8,000 ships, at the math. I've operated under worse odds, he said. Has anyone? Roland said. Chief looked at him. Roland's expression carried the specific quality of an AI who had delivered a line and was uncertain whether the context had been appropriate. That was a genuine question, Roland said, not rhetorical. The command ship's forward display registered the Infinity's arrival in the same moment that Riddick felt it, not through instruments, through the specific instinct that had kept him alive, through things that should have killed him. The specific animal awareness of something new entering a situation, the way a predator felt the introduction of another predator into its territory, not as a sound or a sight, but as a change in the quality of the air. He turned to the display before the alert sounded. The Infinity hung in space at tactical distance from the Armada's forward edge. It was, by any human standard, an enormous vessel, 5.7 kilometers. The sensor profile of a ship designed to operate alone in hostile space for extended periods. The specific energy signature of weapons systems that were currently powered and tracking. Riddick looked at it. He looked at it with the specific quality of attention he gave, things that might require him to recalibrate. The Necromonger fleet was 8,000 ships. The Infinity was 1. The math was not close. But the Infinity had not fired. It had arrived, taken position, and was holding, not advancing, not retreating, not broadcasting on any frequency that the Necromonger communication arrays were currently monitoring. It was simply present, which was itself a communication. The presence said, "We see you. We are capable. We are choosing what to do next rather than reacting." That was not the behavior of something that did not know what it was doing. Riddick looked at the ship for a long moment. Behind him, Vaco had already turned to the tactical array. "A single human vessel," Vaco said. "Lord Marshal, should I know?" Riddick said. Vaco looked at him. "We watch," Riddick said, his eyes on the Infinity. on the ship that had arrived at the edge of an 8,000-strong armada and was holding position rather than running. We watch and we find out what that is before we do anything else. He looked at the colony below, at the conversion still in progress, at the 60% already received. He looked at the Infinity. Something in the calculation he had been running since the moment he took the throne shifted. A variable he had not had before arriving at this world, this moment, this ship that was 1 against 8,000 and had not flinched. A new variable. He did not know what it meant yet. He intended to find out. Subscribe and drop in the comments, can Riddick be reached? Or is he too far gone? Because the answer to that question changes everything that happens next. The Mac round hit the Necromonger vessel at 0.4% the speed of light. Not a full charge. A ranging shot, the specific tactical communication of a weapons system establishing that it was operational and calibrated before the conversation about whether to use it fully had concluded. Roland had flagged the targeting solution to Lasky 3 seconds before firing. Lasky had approved it in 1, and the round was downrange before the Necromonger vessel's crew had finished processing that the Infinity had powered its weapons. The impact was visible from the command ship. The Necromonger vessel, a mid-tier assault craft, approximately 600 meters, positioned at the Armada's forward edge as a screening element, absorbed the kinetic transfer in a way that communicated something important. It did not explode. It did not catastrophically fail. It shuddered, visibly, in the way that very large things shuddered when something hit them with enough force to matter, and its formation position shifted. And 2 of its secondary systems went dark on the Infinity's sensor display. Not destroyed, damaged. Roland processed this and filed it without editorializing, because the implication was already visible to everyone on the bridge. The round was relevant. The physics worked. 1 round had done meaningful damage to a vessel that was not designed with Covenant-grade energy shielding. The implication running in the other direction was equally clear. 1 vessel damaged, 7,999 remaining. They'll respond, Lasky said. He was at the tactical display, his eyes moving across the Armada's formation data, with the specific attention of a commander who was reading the fleet's behavior rather than its composition. They haven't yet, Roland said. Lasky looked at the display. The Armada had not moved. Not a forward surge, not a targeting shift, not the specific reorganization of a fleet transitioning from approach posture to combat posture. The individual vessel that had been hit was stabilizing itself. The fleet around it was watching. The command ship, Lasky said. What's it doing? Roland pulled up the command ship's sensor data. Holding position. No weapons powered beyond baseline. No deployment of additional conversion equipment. He looked at Lasky. Whoever is in command of that fleet made a decision not to respond to the ranging shot. He processed this for a moment. That is not the decision I would have predicted. On the command ship, Riddick had made the decision in approximately 2 seconds. Not because 2 seconds was enough time to fully analyze the situation, it was not. But because 2 seconds was enough time to identify the most important fact in the situation, and the most important fact was this. The Infinity had fired 1 shot. 1 shot. At a fleet of 8,000 ships, the Infinity had fired 1 shot at 1 vessel and then held. The shot was not an attack. The shot was a sentence. It said, "We can hurt you, we know we can hurt you, you now know we can hurt you, and we are choosing to stop at 1 to see what you do with that information." Riddick had communicated in that language his entire life. He looked at the Armada commanders arrayed at their stations around the bridge. The specific rigid posture of Necromonger officers who were waiting for the Lord Marshal's order, who had been trained for centuries to meet an engagement with total commitment, who did not have a category for 1 shot and hold in their operational doctrine because nothing that had ever faced the Necromonger fleet had survived long enough to develop that kind of precision. "Stand down," he said. The Armada commanders looked at him. "The vessel is making a statement," Riddick said. "We received the statement." He looked at the Infinity on the display. "We don't answer it with the fleet." Vaco was at his station. His expression was controlled. The specific control of a man who was filing a disagreement rather than expressing it, because expressing it was not yet tactically appropriate. He filed it. He would retrieve it later. Riddick watched the Infinity hold its position. He thought about the single shot. He thought about what kind of military command structure produced the decision to fire 1 round at 8,000 ships and then wait. He had known people who operated that way, had been that way himself in situations where the specific communication of "I am capable and I am choosing restraint" was worth more than the damage any single action could do. "I want communication," he said. "Open a channel on all human frequencies." He looked at the Infinity. "Let them talk first." Master Chief was already suited when the order came down. The Infinity's hangar had the specific controlled noise of a ship preparing a deployment, not the chaos of an emergency scramble, but the organized urgency of a unit that had trained for this specific category of situation, which was unknown enemy, known threat level, intelligence requirements higher than combat requirements. Lasky's voice on the command channel: "Chief, the mission is intelligence. We need to know what we're dealing with from the inside. Get aboard one of those vessels, find what you can, and get back. You are not there to win a fight." "Understood," Chief said. The Pelican launched on his go. The approach to the Necromonger formation was the specific approach you flew when the objective was a vessel in the middle of a fleet that had 8,000 ships and had, so far, chosen not to use them, which meant flying with the specific transparency of something that was not trying to hide, because hiding communicated something different from what this mission required. Roland in his earpiece: "The vessel I've selected for the breach is a mid-tier assault craft. Third row of the formation, port side. Its systems took partial damage from the ranging shot. The secondary sensors on the hull section I'm routing you to are intermittent. It's the best entry opportunity available." "How many aboard?" Chief said. "Based on energy signatures and life sign density, approximately 4,000. Chief processed this. 4,000 on one mid-tier vessel. "How large is the full fleet's ground force complement?" he said. Roland's response took 2 seconds longer than his responses usually took, which Chief had learned to read as Roland finding a number he did not want to deliver. "Extrapolating from the vessel I've scanned to the full fleet's composition, conservatively several hundred million ground personnel." The Pelican flew toward the formation. Chief looked at the vessel ahead. "Several hundred million. Copy," he said. The breach point was a secondary access panel on the vessel's lower hull, designed for maintenance access, not combat ingress, which meant it was built for Necromonger physiology rather than designed to repel a Spartan II. Chief went through it in 4 seconds. The corridor beyond was the corridor of a ship that had been running a very long time. Not worn, not degraded, but carrying the specific quality of spaces that had been occupied continuously for generations. The materials were unfamiliar. The geometry was almost human, but not quite. The proportions slightly wrong in the way that spaces built by humans for humans over a very long time accumulated small optimizations that made them feel right in ways that were invisible until they were absent. The lighting was dim, amber. The specific quality of illumination that suggested the beings who lived here operated comfortably in lower light than standard human preference. Chief moved through the corridor with the economy of motion that 3 decades of combat had built into him. Each step placed, each angle checked, the specific physical discipline of a soldier who had learned that the difference between alive and not alive was frequently the difference between controlled movement and reactive movement. The first Necromonger warrior found him 60 seconds in. The warrior came around the corridor's bend with the specific movement of a being on a regular patrol route. Not alert, not expecting contact, moving with the settled cadence of someone performing a function they had performed thousands of times. The armor was heavy, the build was large. The face, visible through the helmet's partial visor, was the face of someone who had been through the half-dead transformation. The specific quality of a human face from which a particular layer of expression had been removed, the way you removed paint from a wall and found a different surface underneath. The warrior saw Chief. The warrior did not hesitate. There was no moment of assessment, no visible calculation of threat level, no the specific human sequence of see, process, respond. The warrior simply moved from patrol to combat without transition, which was itself information. Necromonger warriors did not have the hesitation that fear produced, because the half-dead transformation had reduced their fear responses to something that was not operationally relevant. Chief moved first. The exchange lasted 6 seconds. Mjolnir GN2 against Necromonger heavy armor was a physics problem that resolved in favor of Mjolnir. The augmentation, the reactive plating, The strength amplification, putting the chief in a category that individual Necromonger warriors could not match. The warrior went down, then got up. Not quickly, not fully. But the warrior got up, which was the specific new information that Chief filed immediately and completely. The threshold for down was different for a being whose pain response had been altered and whose fear of continued engagement had been reduced below the level that normally stopped a person who had been put on the ground. Chief put him down again with more commitment. The warrior stayed down. Chief moved on. He found the artifact 17 minutes into the breach, in a chamber that was clearly not a standard operational space. The chamber had been modified, the walls lined with what appeared to be theological objects, the specific density of symbolic meaning visible in the arrangement, even without understanding the symbols. This was a devotional space, a place set aside. The artifact sat at the chamber's center on a raised platform. It was approximately the size of a human torso. The material was something Chief's suit sensors identified as Forerunner adjacent. Not Forerunner construction, but resonating with Forerunner energy signatures in the way that objects sometimes resonated when they had been in proximity to Forerunner technology for extended periods. Roland's voice. Chief, I'm reading the artifact through your suit sensors. The energy signature is significant. This is not Necromonger in origin. This predates their civilization. How old? Chief said. Running the decay analysis. A beat. Conservatively, several 100,000 years. It is not Forerunner construction, but something about it is interacting with my Forerunner database entries in ways I need more time to analyze. Roland's voice carried the quality it had when something was genuinely exceeding his models. Chief, the Necromongers are carrying this as a theological object. Their instruments classify it as a marker of proximity to what their records call the Underverse. Chief looked at the artifact, at the chamber around it, the devotional arrangements, the specific reverence visible in how the space had been organized. He took the artifact. The breach withdrawal was noisier than the ingress, not because Chief's technique had changed, but because 4,000 crew on a vessel that had now had its theological centerpiece removed were, by the time he reached the hull breach, aware that something was wrong in the way that ships became aware of things. Through the specific cascade of secondary alerts that followed a primary alert, the communication network propagating the information outward from the chamber. Chief came through the breach point with 3 warriors behind him. The Pelican was there. He got in. The warriors reached the breach point as the Pelican was already moving. One of them grabbed the landing strut. The Pelican carried him approximately 40 meters before the warrior let go. Not because the grip failed, but because the warrior made a decision which Chief filed as. Necromonger warriors were capable of tactical assessment, even in pursuit. They were not mindless. The half-dead transform had not removed intelligence. It had removed the things that made intelligence hesitate. That was a more dangerous enemy than mindless. Roland had the artifact analysis running before Chief was back aboard the Infinity. He presented it to Lasky and Chief simultaneously in the tactical room, with the specific directness of an AI who had found something that required the senior command to understand it fully before making any decisions. The artifact is old, Roland said. Pre-Necromonger, pre-human civilization as we know it. The energy signature has 2 components. He brought up the analysis on the display. The first component matches no known database entry. It is specific to the artifact, something I cannot currently source. The second component is what concerns me. He pulled up the comparative analysis. The second energy component matches the residual signature of Forerunner Domain interaction. He looked at them both. The domain was a Forerunner construct, a kind of collective consciousness, a repository of knowledge and memory that existed outside normal physical space, accessible to Forerunner ancillas and certain Forerunner individuals. The Forerunners believed it was a form of existence that transcended physical death. He looked at the display. The Necromonger theology describes a place they call the Underverse, a realm beyond normal space, accessible through death, the destination of the fleet's march. He looked at Lasky. The artifact resonates with domain interaction signatures. The Necromonger theological instruments classify it as a marker of proximity to the Underverse. The room was quiet. You're saying, Lasky said slowly, that the Necromongers found something that was connected to the Forerunner version of an afterlife, and they interpreted it as confirmation that their afterlife exists. I'm saying, Roland said carefully, that the artifact is real, the Forerunner Domain was real, and the Necromonger Underverse theology appears to be responding to something that is real. He looked at both of them. I am not in a position to tell you whether the Underverse is real. I am in a position to tell you that the artifact is not wrong about something existing. Chief looked at the artifact on the display, at the theological chamber it had come from. He had fought the Covenant. He had seen what happened when a civilization organized itself entirely around a religious conviction that contained an element of genuine truth badly interpreted. He knew what it cost to untangle truth from interpretation at gunpoint. What else did their ship have? Lasky said. Roland, Chief said before Roland could answer. The warriors on that ship, the ones who came after me. Roland looked at him. When you analyze their biology, Chief said, the half-dead transformation, what does it actually do? Roland pulled up the biological analysis from Chief's suit sensors. The transformation reduces the activity of the amygdala and related fear processing structures, not eliminates, reduces, to a level that is operationally non-significant. It also modifies the pain response threshold significantly upward, and he looked at the data. It extends lifespan. The conversion also appears to alter cellular degradation rates. The Necromonger warriors at ship showed biological ages significantly older than their cellular degradation suggested. They live longer, Lasky said. Significantly, Roland said. The transformation is, from a purely biological standpoint, not without benefit. The theological framing describes it as a step toward the Underverse. The biological reality is that it produces beings who live longer, feel less pain, and fear less. He looked at the display. I want to be precise. The transformation takes something from them. The reduction of fear is also the reduction of a significant portion of human emotional range. They are not the same people after conversion, but they are not dead. They are not destroyed. They are changed, Chief said. Yes, Roland said. Lasky looked at the display, at 8,000 ships outside, at the artifact on the table, at the 40% of Kepler's landing that had not yet been converted and was, right now, still themselves. Get me a communication channel, he said. Every human frequency, open broadcast. He looked at the display showing the command ship. Whatever is running that fleet, I need to talk to it. Riddick took the channel himself, not because protocol required it, because the specific quality of the Infinity's communication, the directness of it, the absence of the diplomatic preamble that every civilization they had ever encountered deployed when they wanted something, told him that whoever was on the other end of that channel was going to say something worth hearing. He was right. Lasky's voice came through without introduction. Whoever is commanding that fleet, I have one of your theological artifacts aboard my ship. My AI has been analyzing it for the past 40 minutes. I know what it is. I know what it's connected to. A beat that was not hesitation, but was a choice about pacing. I think you should talk to me before you do anything else, because what we found might change your calculation. The bridge was quiet. Vaco looked at Riddick. Riddick looked at the communication display. He looked at it for a long moment. Captain, he said. His voice on the channel was what his voice always was, flat specific, carrying the minimum required. You have approximately 4 minutes before Lord Vaco recommends I stop this conversation and deploy the fleet. I would use those 4 minutes efficiently. A brief silence from the Infinity's end. Then, fair enough. The artifact you're carrying as a theological object, the one that your instruments classify as a marker of proximity to the Underverse, it's resonating with Forerunner technology, specifically with something called the Domain. The Forerunners were a civilization that predates mine by 100,000 years. They believed in a form of existence beyond physical death. They built machines to interact with it. Another beat. The artifact isn't pointing you toward your Underverse. It's pointing you toward theirs.
The Necromongers might not be chasing a myth. They might be chasing something real, which is honestly way scarier. Okay, lore nerds, did anybody else catch how dangerous that revelation is? Because if the Domain and the Underverse are connected...
The bridge was quiet. Riddick's eyes moved across the display. At the artifact data his own instruments had been collecting for the months since the fleet found it. At the Infinity, at the calculation that had been running since the throne changed hands and had not until this moment had a variable that changed its output. He looked at Vaco. Vaco's expression was the expression of a true believer encountering information that his framework was not designed to process. Not rejection, the specific blankness of a system overloaded. 4 minutes is not enough time, Riddick said on the channel. No, Lasky said. It isn't. Riddick looked at the armada around him, at the fleet that had been marching for centuries, at the variable he had not had before. I'm coming to you, he said. Vako's head turned sharply. Riddick did not look at him. Prepare a shuttle, he said to the bridge crew, his voice carrying the specific flat authority of a man who had killed the previous person in his position and was not performing the reminder that he had. The shuttle was prepared. The shuttle crossed the distance between the command ship and the Infinity in 11 minutes. Riddick flew it himself, not because he didn't trust the Necromonger pilots. They were competent, trained, half-dead in the specific way that made them reliable rather than brilliant. He flew it himself because the approach to the Infinity was the kind of approach that communicated something. And Riddick had been communicating through action rather than words since before he could articulate why. And the thing this approach needed to communicate was, I am coming alone, and I am coming as myself. Not as the Lord Marshal, not as the representative of 8,000 ships, as the specific individual who killed the previous Lord Marshal and took his title and has been calculating ever since. A pilot communicated none of that. The Infinity grew in the shuttle's forward viewport with a specific quality of size that resolved differently up close than on a display. Not just larger, but more deliberate. The engineering of it visible as intention rather than scale. The kind of ship built by people who had survived something that should have killed them and had decided to build the thing that made sure it didn't happen again. Riddick understood that impulse completely. Roland's voice came through the shuttle's communication array as the docking approach began. Lord Marshal, I'm going to ask you to relinquish your weapons before boarding. Not as a condition, as a practical note. Captain Lasky's standing order on weapons in this context is that the person without them demonstrates something the person with them cannot. Riddick looked at the communication panel. Your captain say that, he said. I paraphrased, Roland said. The spirit is accurate. Riddick looked at the weapons at his side. He thought about the specific calculation involved in walking onto an alien warship without them, the math of it, the exposure, the way vulnerability functioned as communication in situations where combat was not the primary variable. He left them in the shuttle. The hangar bay of the Infinity had the specific quality of a space that had been organized for this meeting. Not cleared for combat, not arranged for ceremony, but set up for conversation in the way that military spaces were set up for conversation when the military personnel involved understood that conversation was the mission. Lasky was there. Master Chief was there, in full Mjolnir, which communicated something back. We are not pretending this is not a military context. We are simply choosing not to make it one right now. And standing to Lasky's left, in the specific posture of someone who had traveled a significant distance to be present and was not going to explain why unless asked, the Arbiter. Riddick came down the boarding ramp. He looked at the three of them. His eyes, the silvered Furian eyes, the ones that had been cut in a prison because a doctor owed him a favor, the ones that let him see in complete darkness and that made the specific quality of his gaze different from any gaze that normal human eyes produced, moved across the assembled group with the assessment that was his default mode of encountering anything new. He looked at the Arbiter longest. The Arbiter was not human. The Sangheili physiology was visible even at distance. The height, the mandibles, the specific physical architecture of a species that had evolved as apex predators and had then built a civilization on top of that evolution. He was in partial armor, the specific partial armor of someone who was not here to fight, but was not pretending they couldn't. The Arbiter looked back at Riddick with the eyes of someone who was doing the same assessment and finding something in the result that he had not expected to find. Riddick came to a stop at conversational distance. He looked at Lasky. Your AI said the artifact changes my calculation, he said. No preamble, no performance of the diplomatic register. Show me. Lasky looked at Roland. Roland's holographic form materialized, not dramatically, with the simple efficiency of a system activating, and pulled up the analysis display that had been running since the artifact came aboard. The artifact is approximately 300,000 years old, Roland said. It predates the Necromonger civilization. The energy signature has two components. The first, skip to the part that matters, Riddick said. Roland looked at him. The second component resonates with Forerunner Domain interaction signatures, Roland said. He did not adjust the pace of his delivery to match Riddick's impatience. He delivered the information at the rate that the information required to be understood. The domain was a Forerunner construct, a space not physical, not purely metaphysical, that existed outside normal spacetime. The Forerunners believed it was a repository of consciousness beyond death. Their most advanced individuals could interact with it. Their technology could reach it. He looked at Riddick. Your artifact is not Forerunner, but it has been in proximity to something that interacted with the domain for a very long time. Riddick looked at the display, at the artifact's energy signature, at the Forerunner comparative data, the Underverse, he said. Your theological instruments classify the artifact as a proximity marker, Roland said. The instruments are responding to the domain interaction signature. Whether the Underverse and the domain are the same phenomenon, related phenomena, or separate phenomena that share certain physical properties, I cannot tell you. He looked at Riddick directly. What I can tell you is that the artifact is real, the domain was real, and your fleet has been navigating towards something that exists. The hangar was quiet. Riddick looked at the artifact on the display. He had spent 4 months as Lord Marshal carrying a title that derived its authority from the previous Lord Marshal having visited the Underverse and returned, changed, carrying the powers that proximity to the Underverse produced, the specific abilities that marked the Lord Marshal as someone who had been to the edge of what the theology described. He had used those powers. He had felt what they felt like from the inside. He had never believed they were what the theology said they were. He was revising that, not the theology. The assumption that the theology was entirely wrong. What's near here, he said, in this space? What Forerunner installations are within range? Roland pulled up the survey data. There is a Forerunner installation approximately 30 light minutes from our current position. It has been in our survey database for 8 months. We have been moving to begin a full assessment. He highlighted it on the display, Captain. Lasky looked at the installation data. He looked at Riddick. He looked at the fleet outside. You want to go there, Lasky said. You want to go there, Riddick said. I want to see what happens when your Forerunner technology and my theological instruments are in the same place at the same time. He looked at Lasky steadily. Neither of us knows what that produces. Both of us need to know. The Arbiter had been watching Riddick since he came down the ramp. Not with the assessment of a soldier reading a threat. The assessment was complete within the first 30 seconds, and the conclusion was filed. He was watching with the attention of someone who had found something unexpected in a place he had not thought to look for it. He moved to stand beside Riddick as Roland's briefing concluded. Riddick looked at him. The Arbiter's voice was the formal register of Sangheili speech translated through the universal communication system, the specific quality of a language that had been built around honor as a structural principle showing through even in translation. You do not believe, he said, not a question, not an accusation. The flat statement of someone identifying a fact they recognized, because they had been intimate with it. Riddick looked at him. Never did, he said, and yet you lead them, the Arbiter said. The single word that Riddick said carried the entire architecture of the situation, the throne taken by killing, the law of you keep what you kill, the fleet that required a Lord Marshal, the specific trap of a position that could not be vacated without the machine destroying everything around it when it collapsed. Riddick said. The Arbiter was quiet for a moment. His eyes, the Sangheili eyes, gold and specific, the eyes of a species that had spent millennia as warriors, and then longer still as religious soldiers, and then, in the most difficult transition of all, as something that was neither. Looked at Riddick with the recognition of someone meeting their mirror in a form they had not predicted. I led a fleet, the Arbiter said. In the name of a faith I believed completely. I sent fleets to destroy human worlds because my theology told me that humanity was an affront to the sacred, that our gods demanded their extinction. He looked at his hands, the gesture of a being who had been doing this for years, the specific physical acknowledgement of what those hands had done. I was the most devoted servant of a lie that cost more than I can calculate. Riddick looked at him. And then you found out it was a lie, Riddick said. And then I found out, the Arbiter said. And I had to decide what to do with the fleet I had built in its name. He looked at Riddick. I know what it costs to be the wrong person in the right position. The hangar held them. Master Chief, standing at the edge of the exchange, was doing what Master Chief did in situations where the primary variable was not combat. He was listening with the full attention of a soldier who understood that intelligence was the mission and was treating every word as intelligence. Lasky watched the Arbiter and Riddick. He had brought the Arbiter for this reason, had contacted him before the meeting, had made the judgment call that the one person in the UNSC's operational sphere who had direct experience of what Riddick was carrying was the Arbiter, and that direct experience was worth the travel time. He watched the exchange confirm the judgment. Two warriors, two conquest cultures, two men who had seen through the faith they were leading and had found themselves on the other side of that, seeing with a fleet that did not know what they knew and would not easily accept knowing it. The Arbiter looked at Riddick. "What will you do with the truth?" he said, "when you find it?" Riddick's expression was the expression he had when he was being honest, not the performance of honesty, the actual thing, which looked different from the performance because it was quieter. "Use it," he said. "Only thing truth is good for." The Forerunner installation was 30 light minutes away and looked, from approach, like most Forerunner installations looked, ancient, geometric, built to a scale that communicated the Forerunners' relationship to their own significance, which was that they had considered themselves very significant indeed. The joint approach, a UNSC Pelican and a Necromonger shuttle flying in the specific formation of two parties who had agreed to cooperate on a specific objective and were communicating that agreement through proximity, was Roland's suggestion, and Lasky had approved it, and Riddick had accepted it without comment, which was itself a form of approval. The installation's outer surface was dark, not powered down dark, the specific dark of something that had been waiting. It activated when they were 400 meters out. Not aggressively, the activation sequence was the activation sequence of a system coming online rather than a weapon deploying. The difference visible in the energy signature pattern that Roland was monitoring and calling in real time. But it was responding to their approach. To their specific approach, Roland's analysis confirmed within 30 seconds that the installation was responding to two signatures simultaneously. The Forerunner interface capability that the UNSC systems carried, and the Lord Marshal's theological resonance, both together. Neither alone would have done it. "What is this place?" Riddick said. He was standing at the installation's main access point, his eyes scanning the interior in the specific way that his eyes scan things, not with the equipment-assisted scan of Mjolnir sensors, but with the Furian vision that saw in frequencies that standard human eyes did not, the silver optics reading the installation's interior in a way that went slightly sideways from normal visual spectrum. "A translation array," Roland said from Lasky's communication system, Forerunner built. The specific architecture suggests it was designed to interact with the domain, to send and receive information from outside normal space-time. He processed for a moment. "I've been in 43 Forerunner installations. I've never seen this configuration." "What does it do specifically?" Lasky said. "It translates us," Roland said. "The domain is not accessible in normal space-time directly. This array creates a bridge, is the closest word, between normal space-time and whatever the domain's spatial coordinates are." He looked at the display. The installation activated in response to Lord Marshal Riddick's resonance. Specifically, the powers the Lord Marshal carries are Underverse adjacent. They are the same class of phenomenon as domain interaction. To this installation, they look identical. The installation's interior lit, not suddenly, in the specific gradual way of systems that were old enough that their activation sequences had been designed with patience, built by beings who had time to spare. The light was the same color as the artifact's secondary energy signature. Riddick looked at it. His hands were doing something at his sides, not reaching for weapons he didn't have. The specific movement of someone feeling a sensation they didn't have a prior reference for. The Lord Marshal's powers, the ability to project his spiritual form, to reach into a living being and interact with their life essence, the specific abilities that derived from proximity to the Underverse, were responding to the installation's activation in a way that was not voluntary and was not alarming but was present and impossible to ignore. Like a frequency you couldn't unhear once the signal found the right receiver. "Something's happening," Chief said. He was at the installation's secondary access, his sensors running, his assessment continuous. "The energy readings are building." They were, Roland. "Captain, the array is initiating a translation sequence." "I don't know the destination." Lasky looked at Riddick. Riddick was looking at the installation's central column, the specific column that was the array's primary emitter, with the expression of a man who was feeling something from the outside of his own volition for the first time in his life and was calibrating whether to trust it. The Necromonger fleet felt it before the instruments registered it, not as a sensor reading, as a resonance. The theological instruments aboard every vessel in the Armada began responding simultaneously. The specific simultaneous response that happened when something of Underverse proximity was detected at a magnitude that exceeded the instrument's normal operating range. Vako was on the bridge. He looked at the readings. He looked at them with the expression of a true believer who has spent decades moving toward a destination and has just received the strongest signal of proximity he has ever encountered. And the expression was not excitement. It was something deeper and quieter and more absolute than excitement. It was the expression of someone receiving confirmation of everything they had structured their existence around. The Underverse, he said. The bridge was silent. It is near, Vako said. His voice had the quality it had in the theological ceremonies, the specific register of liturgy spoken as living truth rather than recitation. The Lord Marshal has found the path. He turned to the tactical array. He did not consult Riddick. He did not request authorization. He gave the order. All vessels advance, he said. Navigation on the Lord Marshal's coordinates, full speed. 8,000 ships began to move. The wormhole opened without warning.
Hold on. This is the moment everything changes. Because up until now, this has been a Halo Riddick crossover. The second that wormhole opens, we're playing a completely different game.
Roland registered the energy buildup 3 seconds before the event and had time to say exactly one word, Captain. Before the translation array completed its sequence and the space 30 meters from the installation's primary emitter tore open in a way that was not a slip-space rupture and was not a Forerunner portal and was not anything in Roland's database, which was a database that included the Bajoran wormhole's theoretical parameters from the astronomical observations the UNSC had been building since the war ended. It matched the theoretical parameters. The wormhole was, there was no other word for it, beautiful. The specific beauty of physics, doing something that physics was not supposed to do, the interior visible as a tunnel of light that went somewhere that was not this space, that opened onto a region of stars that no one present had seen before, and that the navigational AI aboard the Infinity, cross-referencing in real time, identified as consistent with the Alpha Quadrant of the Milky Way galaxy, approximately 70,000 light-years from their current position. Riddick looked at it. He looked at it with the Furian eyes that saw things slightly differently from standard human visual processing. And what he saw was not just the wormhole, but the quality of what was inside it. The specific luminescent presence of something that was aware, that was not spatial in the way that physical things were spatial, that existed in the wormhole the way the prophets of Bajor existed in the wormhole, which was to say outside of time in a way that made the word inside approximately meaningless. He knew in the specific way, he knew things that he had not been told and could not have deduced, that the wormhole was not the Underverse. He also knew, with equal certainty, that whatever was inside it knew what the Underverse was. Behind them, 8,000 Necromonger ships were moving at full speed toward the installation's coordinates, toward the wormhole, to what their instruments were classifying as the strongest Underverse proximity signal in the fleet's centuries of records. Vako's voice came through on the command channel, the fleet channel, not the closed channel, the channel that every Necromonger officer could hear. Lord Marshal, the path is open, lead us through. Riddick looked at the wormhole. He looked at Chief. He looked at Lasky. He looked at the Arbiter, who was looking at the wormhole with the expression of a being who had encountered genuinely new things before, and had learned that genuinely new things required the full version of your attention rather than the categorized version. It's not the Underverse, Riddick said, not on the fleet channel. To the people in this installation. No, Roland said. It is not. But something's in it that knows what the Underverse is. Roland processed this for 2 seconds. That is, a reasonable interpretation of the energy readings. Yes, the Necromonger fleet was still moving. Vako was not going to stop it. The fleet would go through the wormhole, whether Riddick led it or not, because the instrument said Underverse, because Vako had given the order, because the faith had been marching for centuries and centuries of momentum, did not stop because one man had a doubt, unless the one man was in front of it. Riddick looked at the wormhole, at the thing inside it that was not spatial and was aware. He made the calculation he always made. not the calculation of what was right. He had never organized his decisions around what was right. The calculation of what was survivable and what was not. The specific arithmetic of a man who had been everyone's enemy for his entire life and had survived by being the most honest person in the room about what the actual options were. The actual options were, the fleet went through. He was not in front of it. Vako led it into whatever was on the other side. Whatever was on the other side got Vako's version of the Necromonger fleet, which was the pure version, the true believer version, the version that had no deviation from the doctrine of convert or kill, or he went through. He was in front of it. Whatever was on the other side got his version, which was the version that was looking for a door. He looked at Lasky. "Your ship needs to follow us through," he said. Lasky looked at the wormhole, at 8,000 ships moving toward it, at the specific shape of a situation that had already made the decision and was waiting for the people in it to catch up. "Roland," he said. "Already plotting the course, Captain," Roland said. Deep Space Nine received the wormhole activation at 14:23 hours station time. The wormhole had opened and closed tens of thousands of times in the years since its discovery. Kira Nerys knew its activation signature the way she knew the sound of the station's environmental systems. Background, present, unremarkable. This activation was not that. The energy signature was wrong. Not wrong in the way of a technical malfunction. Wrong in the way of something that was a different order of magnitude from the normal activation. The wormhole responding to something from the other side that was not a Gamma Quadrant vessel making a transit, and was not a Starfleet probe, and was not anything in the activation profile database that the station had been building for years. Kira looked at the sensor readings, at the size of what was coming through. "Battle stations," she said. Her voice had the quality it had in situations where the correct response was immediate action before full assessment, because full assessment was not going to be available before whatever was coming was already here. "Get me Sisko." Odo was already at his station. His face, the approximated human face that he had built over years of practice, was the face he wore when he was processing something that required the full version of his attention. "The readings are," he looked at the display. "The mass of what's transiting is in excess of anything the wormhole has handled before. Orders of magnitude in excess." The wormhole pulsed. The first Necromonger ship came through, then the second, then the third. Kira looked at the sensor display. She looked at it with the expression of someone who had survived the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, the Dominion War, and several personal encounters with beings that existed outside of normal spacetime, and who had developed a relationship with impossible situations that was not fearlessness, but was the specific quality of someone who had decided that fear was a resource she could not afford. "That's a lot of ships," she said. 8,417, Odo said. "Current count. Still transiting." The Necromonger armada filled the space near DS9 the way it had filled the sky above Kepler's landing. Not as individual vessels, but as a totality. Then the Infinity came through. Odo looked at it. "That one is different," he said. "Human configuration. Unknown variant. The hull markings. The communication array activated." Sisko's voice, arriving from his quarters where he had been since Kira's alert. "What am I looking at?" Kira looked at 8,000 Necromonger ships and one Unsk warship arrayed near the station. She looked at the wormhole behind them. The wormhole pulsed again. Not an activation, a response. The specific pulse it made when the prophets were present and were communicating something to someone who knew how to read it. Sisko came onto the bridge 30 seconds later. He looked at the sensor display. He looked at the wormhole. The pulse happened again. Sisko had been reading prophet communications for years. The specific quality of this pulse, the frequency, the duration, the specific pattern that was not language and was not imagery, but was the thing the prophets used when they needed someone to understand something quickly, communicated in the way that everything the prophets communicated, not in words, in certainty. This is what we have been waiting for. Not welcome, not warning, this. Sisko looked at the fleet, at a single different vessel, at the wormhole. His expression was the expression he had when the prophets had shown him something he did not want to be shown and had understood it anyway. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies." He looked at the fleet. "To whoever is in command of what just came through my wormhole, this is Captain Benjamin Sisko of Deep Space Nine. I suggest we talk before anyone does anything irreversible."
Okay, hold on for a second, because I genuinely did not expect the story to go here. We started with Halo trying to stop a Necromonger conversion fleet, and somehow we've ended up with Deep Space Nine, the Prophets, the Underverse, and a wormhole that might completely rewrite everything the Necromongers believe. And here's the part that has me hooked. What if the Underverse is real, but they've been chasing it the wrong way for centuries? Trust me, the next section is where this story goes from a crossover to something much bigger.
Picard received the DS9 distress signal at 15:01 hours. Not a distress signal in the conventional sense, not the automated emergency broadcast that the Federation's crisis protocols produced when a station was under attack. Something more specific. A priority communication from Sisko, text only, which Picard had learned over years of knowing Sisko meant. The situation is too complicated for audio. I need you to read this carefully before you respond. He read it carefully. He read it again. Then he looked at his first officer and said, "Set a course for Deep Space Nine. Maximum warp." He looked at the star chart. "And get me Worf." The Enterprise E dropped out of warp at the edge of the DS9 sensor range 47 minutes later, and Picard saw the Armada on the tactical display before the view screen had finished resolving. He looked at it. He had looked at the Borg cube on his view screen. He had looked at the scimitar. He had looked at things that were designed to produce the specific psychological effect of overwhelming scale in the minds of the people facing them. And he had developed, through those encounters, the specific discipline of meeting the overwhelming with the full version of his analytical capability rather than the compressed version that fear produced. He looked at the Armada. He looked at it for a full 10 seconds. "Counselor," he said. Traw, at her station, was already reading the situation with the empathic capability that she had been calibrating against alien psychologies for 20 years. The fleet's emotional signature is, she stopped, started again, collective, not in the Borg sense, not a hive mind. But there is a uniformity to the emotional register that I've never encountered in a species before. She looked at Picard. They are not afraid, none of them. 8,000 ships and not one crew member aboard any of them is experiencing what I would identify as fear. Picard looked at the Armada. "Can you read the command ship specifically?" he said. "Try focused." "The command ship has a different signature," she said slowly. "There are two distinct emotional registers aboard it. The majority," she processed, "same collective quality, uniform. The fear response absent." She looked at the view screen. "But one individual, on the bridge. The signature is completely different. Isolation, calculation, and something I don't have a word for." She looked at Picard. "It reads like a person who has been alone in a crowd for a very long time." Picard looked at the command ship, at the single different signature. "That," he said, "is the person I need to speak with." The communication array on the command ship registered the Enterprise E's hailing frequency, and Riddick did not answer it immediately. He was standing at the forward viewport, the actual viewport, not the display, because Riddick processed situations through direct observation rather than mediated data when direct observation was available. Looking at Deep Space Nine and the two Starfleet vessels that had positioned themselves between the Armada and the station, with the specific positioning of ships that knew they could not win a military engagement and had decided that positioning was a form of communication rather than a tactical advantage. The Kling fleet had arrived 17 minutes ago. 38 warships. The specific Klingon approach, not the diplomatic approach, not the assessed approach, the direct approach of a warrior culture encountering a threat and moving toward it rather than away from it. They had taken position to the Armada's starboard flank and had been there since without firing, which Riddick had read correctly as, "We are here, we are capable, we are waiting for a reason to act, two civilizations and their fleets. One station, one wormhole behind it." And on the Infinity, holding position at the Armada's trailing edge, Lasky was managing the specific problem of having followed 8,000 Necromonger ships through a wormhole and arrived in a different galaxy with no resupply, no support, and the complete diplomatic weight of representing humanity to two new civilizations simultaneously, while also managing his relationship with a fleet that was not his and was not going to be. Vako's voice on the command channel was it always was when he was filing something rather than expressing it. "Lord Marshal, the Federation vessels are hailing us." "I know," Riddick said. "The theology requires." "I know what the theology requires," Riddick said. He did not look away from the viewport. "Give me the channel." He took the communication himself. Picard's face on the display had the quality that Picard's face always had when he was doing the thing he was best at, which was not commanding a starship, not winning engagements, not navigating the political architecture of the Federation. It was this: encountering something completely new and meeting it with the full version of his intellectual and moral capability rather than the reduced version that categories and prior assumptions produced. He looked at Riddick. Riddick looked at him. "I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise," Picard said. "I'd like to understand what your fleet's intentions are before either of us makes a decision that forecloses other decisions." Riddick looked at him, at the specific quality of a man who had opened a communication with an 8,000-ship armada by asking about intentions rather than making demands or issuing ultimatums. "Your Federation," Riddick said. "What does it want?" Picard looked at him steadily. "That's a large question." "Give me the short version," Riddick said. Picard considered. "To explore, to understand, to build connections between civilizations that allow them to exist alongside each other without destroying each other." He looked at Riddick. "To find peaceful resolutions to conflicts that seem, on initial assessment, to have none." Riddick looked at him. "Your fleet," Picard said. The answer to that question was the theology, was the Underverse, was the march that had been running for centuries. Riddick looked at the display and thought about all the ways to answer it accurately, and found that the accurate answer was too long for a communication that needed to be short, and too complicated for a first conversation, and too true to simplify without lying. "It wants something," he said, "that it doesn't know how to find." Picard's expression did not change in the way that most people's expressions changed when they received information that was not what they expected. It changed in the way that Picard's expression changed, which was to become more focused. "And do you?" Riddick looked at him. "Working on it," he said. The channel held. Then Picard said, with the specific directness of a man who had decided that indirection was not what this moment required, "Then I'd like to work on it with you, face to face, aboard this station." He looked at Riddick. "I'll come to DS9. I'm asking you to come to DS9. No weapons, no fleets. Two people in a room trying to understand each other." He looked at the Armada. "Your fleet stays where it is. My fleet stays where it is. We talk."
Quick shout out to TB9656 and everyone who's been supporting these crossover stories. And seriously, drop a comment if this is the first time you've ever seen Riddick, Master Chief Picard, and Sisko in the same story, because that sentence still sounds ridiculous.
Riddick looked at him. "Working on it," he said. The channel held. Then Picard said, with the specific directness of a man who had decided that indirection was not what this moment required, "Then I'd like to work on it with you, face to face, aboard this station." He looked at Riddick. "I'll come to DS9. I'm asking you to come to DS9. No weapons, no fleets. Two people in a room trying to understand each other." He looked at the Armada. "Your fleet stays where it is. My fleet stays where it is. We talk." Riddick looked at him, at the Armada on the display, at Vaco visible in his peripheral vision, watching the communication with the expression of a man who was building a case. "Same conditions I gave Lasky," Riddick said. "I'm aware of your conversation with Captain Lasky," Picard said. "He briefed me. It's why I'm asking." Riddick looked at him for a long moment. "1 hour," he said. "I'll be there," Picard said. The wardroom of Deep Space Nine had been the location of more significant conversations than its architecture deserved. It was a functional room, not designed for the weight of historic moments, designed for the practical purpose of a working space on a working station. The table was the table. The viewport showed the stars and the Armada beyond them, and the wormhole that pulsed occasionally in the way the wormhole pulsed when the prophets were present and engaged. Sisko was there. Picard was there, having arrived from the Enterprise in the time between the communication and the meeting, with the efficiency of a man who understood that efficiency was a form of respect. Lasky was there. He had come from the Infinity because the conversation that was happening required the UNSC's presence to be real rather than represented. Riddick came in last. He looked at the assembled group with the specific quality of assessment he gave every room he entered. The inventory, the exits, the specific human geography of who was standing where and what that communicated about their relationship to the situation. He looked at Sisko longer than he looked at the others. Sisko looked back. The recognition between them was not the recognition that had happened between Riddick and the Arbiter, that had been the recognition of mirrors, two warriors from conquest cultures who had seen through the faith. This was different. This was the recognition of two people who had been inside something that existed outside normal space and had come back carrying it, and who could see in each other the specific quality of that carrying. Riddick sat down. Picard began. He began the way Picard always began things that mattered, not with a statement, with a question. "I've been briefed on the Necromonger doctrine," he said. "Convert or kill, no exceptions, no negotiations." He looked at Riddick. "I want to understand the theology behind it, not to refute it, to understand it." Riddick looked at him. "The Underverse," Riddick said. The word flat, a fact, not a prayer. Necromonger theology says there's a realm beyond this universe, beyond death. The previous Lord Marshals visited it, came back changed, carrying the powers you'd get from being at the edge of something that exists outside normal space-time. He looked at his hands. The gesture he had developed in 4 months of carrying the Lord Marshal's powers. The specific gesture of someone checking on something they were not fully comfortable having. The fleet has been marching toward it for centuries. Every world they encounter gets the same offer. Convert, join the march, move toward the Underverse together. Refuse, and they're destroyed. Because those who refuse, Picard said carefully, are, in the theology's framing, choosing to remain in a state the theology considers inferior. Choosing to stay dead when salvation's available, Riddick said. That's how Vako would put it. And how would you put it, Picard said. Riddick looked at him. I'd say the theology has a real destination and a wrong map, he said. The Underverse exists. What it is, that's what the map gets wrong. The room held this. Lasky looked at Riddick. He had heard a version of this at the Forerunner installation, but hearing it stated this plainly to Picard, in this room, with Sisko present, it landed differently. Picard looked at Riddick for a long moment. The prophets, he said. He looked at Sisko. You believe the beings in the wormhole, the prophets, are connected to what the Necromonger theology is describing. The prophets exist outside normal time, Riddick said. They exist in a space that is not spatial in the way this room is spatial. The Underverse is described in the theology as a realm beyond this universe, accessible through death or proximity to death. He looked at the wormhole through the viewport. Those descriptions are of the same category of thing. Whether they're the same thing, that's what I need to find out. Sisko had been quiet. He had been quiet in the specific way of someone who had information that was relevant and was calculating when the information became more useful than the quiet. He looked at the wormhole. The prophets showed me something, he said. When your fleet came through, before you arrived here, before any communication had been made, the wormhole pulsed. Not a transit pulse, a communication. He looked at Riddick. They were showing me that your arrival was expected, that they had been aware of it. He looked at his hands on the table. The prophets don't experience time linearly. They have known about your fleet for as long as they have existed, which is longer than the concept of as long as is meaningful. The room absorbed this. They know what the Underverse is, Riddick said. Not a question. I don't know what they know, Sisko said. I know they communicate in visions, and that they chose not to warn us about your arrival. They chose to let it happen. He looked at Riddick. In my experience, when the prophets let something happen rather than preventing it, it is because the thing that happens is the thing that needs to happen. Riddick looked at the wormhole. At the pulse in its event horizon that occurred at intervals, not regular intervals, the specific irregular intervals of a consciousness that was not bound by regular time expressing itself in a medium that was. I need to go in, he said. Sisko looked at him. I know, Sisko said. Worf had been at the tactical station when the meeting began. He had watched Riddick come aboard DS9 on the internal sensors, had run the assessment with the completeness that 20 years of combined Starfleet and Klingon service produced. The physical capability, the weapons he was not carrying, the specific quality of someone who had removed their weapons as a communication rather than as a surrender. He had reached 2 conclusions. The first, Riddick was the most dangerous individual currently aboard the station. The second, Riddick was also, in the specific way of dangerous individuals who had decided not to be dangerous at a particular moment, someone whose decision not to be dangerous was worth more than most people's active guarantees. He opened a channel to Chancellor Martok on the Klingon flagship. Martok's face on the display was the face of a warrior who had been in the waiting position for 40 minutes and was managing the waiting with the specific quality of someone for whom patience was a discipline rather than a virtue. Worf, Martok said. Chancellor. Worf looked at the armada on the display. The fleet's warriors, the conversion, the theology of their death. Martok looked at the armada. I have been looking at them, Martok said. His voice carried something that Worf recognized. Not admiration, the specific, reluctant acknowledgement of a warrior encountering another warrior tradition. Their soldiers do not fear death. They have accepted death as a transition, Worf said. Their theology frames it as a step toward their promised realm. The conversion process reduces the fear response biologically. He looked at the display. They are not afraid because they believe death is the beginning of what they are marching toward. Martok was quiet. Klingons believe death in battle is the entrance to Sto-Vokor, that he said. Yes, Worf said. The difference, Martok said slowly, is that we do not march through the galaxy converting people to the belief before we allow them to die. No, Worf said. We do not. Martok looked at the armada. Can they be fought, he said, militarily, if the talking fails? Worf ran the analysis he had been running since the armada arrived. The fleet's numbers are overwhelming at full engagement. Individual vessels, their warriors, are formidable but not superior to Klingon warriors in direct combat. The conversion process produces soldiers who feel less and fear less. That is a military advantage. He looked at the display, but it is not an advantage that cannot be met. Martok's jaw moved in the way it moved when he had arrived at a conclusion he did not fully like. Then we are here, he said. And if the talking fails, we'll find out together what it costs. Dame Vako had not spoken during the fleet's transit. She had been present at every command meeting, at every tactical assessment, at every moment when Vako had been making decisions that were nominally Riddick's to make. She had been present, and she had been quiet in the specific way of someone who was not absent from the situation, but was choosing the investment of their attention with more precision than the situation's other participants. She watched Vako. She had been watching Vako for longer than the current Lord Marshal's tenure, had been watching him with the specific attention of a woman who understood that political intelligence was the most durable weapon in any arsenal, and who had built hers over decades of proximity to power. Vako believed. This was, in Dame Vako's assessment, his primary weakness and his primary asset simultaneously. He believed completely. The faith was not performance for him. It was the organizing principle of everything he was. The Underverse was as real to him as the deck beneath his feet, and the march toward it was as necessary as breathing. His belief made him dangerous. It also made him predictable. She watched him at the tactical station, managing the fleet in Riddick's absence, and she thought about what she was watching. A true believer managing a fleet toward a destination that the Lord Marshal had publicly cast doubt on, in a galaxy they had not planned to enter, with two civilizations arrayed against them and a third present in the form of the UNSC warship that had followed them through. She thought about the specific political architecture of what happened next. If Riddick's wormhole engagement produced what he apparently believed it would produce, a path to redirecting the fleet, a truth about the Underverse that allowed the march to stop, the fleet would fracture. The true believers would not accept it from Riddick. They had tolerated his deviations because the Lord Marshal's authority was absolute under the law. They would not tolerate a Lord Marshal who told them the march was wrong. If Riddick failed, if the wormhole produced nothing useful, if the civilizations arrayed against them escalated to military engagement, if the political situation deteriorated, Vako would act. The law was clear. The Lord Marshal who could not lead was a Lord Marshal who could be replaced. Dame Vako thought about both outcomes. She thought about the specific position that the fleet needed to be in after either of them resolved. She moved to the communication station. She activated a channel on a frequency that was not the fleet's standard communication architecture. A frequency she had maintained for exactly this category of situation, the category she thought of privately as the situation where the current arrangement becomes untenable and a new arrangement becomes necessary. The channel connected. She looked at the door to confirm she was alone. She said 4 words, "Find another Lord Marshal." She closed the channel. She returned to her station. She watched Vako manage the fleet. Her expression did not change. Sisko stood at the wormhole's edge. Not literally, he was at DS9's main viewport, the one that looked out toward Bajor and the wormhole, which was close enough. He had been here before conversations with the prophets many times. He had learned, over years of non-linear communication with beings who experienced all time simultaneously, that the preparation for talking to them was not preparation in the conventional sense. You could not prepare for nonlinear beings, you could only be present. Riddick came to stand beside him. Not beside him exactly. The viewport was long, and they were both at it, looking at the wormhole in the way that two people looked at the same thing when the thing was large enough and important enough that the looking was itself a form of conversation. "You've been in there," Riddick said. "Many times," Sisko said. "What is it like?" Riddick said. Sisko thought about this. He thought about it honestly, with the specific honesty of someone who had been asked a question that deserved the real answer rather than the manageable version. "It is like being shown everything that you are," he said. "Not everything you have done, everything you are. The prophets don't experience time linearly. They see you as the complete thing rather than the sequential thing. They show you moments from your past and your future simultaneously, not to inform you, to show you the shape of you." He looked at the wormhole. "It is the most orienting experience I have had, and I have had some disorienting experiences." Riddick looked at the wormhole. "The Lord Marshal's powers," he said. "The previous ones, they went to the Underverse and came back different. They came back with the ability to reach into a living being and interact with their life essence, to project their spiritual form outside their body." He looked at his hands. "I have those powers. I didn't earn them the way they did. I got them when I killed the previous Lord Marshal. They came with the title." Sisko looked at him, and he said, "And I need to know what they actually are," Riddick said, "before I go in there. Because if the prophets show me everything that I am, I need to know what I'm carrying." Sisko looked at the wormhole, at the pulse that occurred, not timed, not regular. The specific irregular pulse of a consciousness expressing itself in a medium that constrained it. "They already know what you're carrying," Sisko said. "They've known since before you were born. That's the thing about beings who exist outside time. You don't introduce yourself to them. They introduce themselves to you." Riddick looked at the wormhole, at the pulsing light inside it, at the thing that was not spatial and was aware and had been waiting, in whatever way a nonlinear consciousness waited, for this specific moment. "One question," Riddick said. Sisko looked at him. "The prophets," Riddick said. "Have they ever lied to you?" Sisko thought about this for a long time. "They have shown me things I did not want to see," he said. "They have shown me truths that cost me more than I had budgeted for them." He looked at the wormhole. "But they have never shown me something that was not true." Riddick looked at the wormhole, at the truth that was waiting inside it, at the fleet behind him, at Vaco, at the march that had been running for centuries, at the 4 months of calculation that had not, until the Forerunner installation, had a variable that changed its output. He looked at Sisko. "Stay here," he said. "When I come out, I'm going to need someone who understands what just happened to me." Sisko looked at him. "I'll be here," he said. Riddick walked toward the airlock, toward the shuttle, toward the wormhole. Behind him, Sisko looked at the pulsing light, the pulse that said, "This is what we have been waiting for. Not welcome, not warning. This." The wormhole received Riddick the way it received everything, without preference, without ceremony, with the specific indifference of a phenomenon that did not require the beings passing through it to understand what it was in order to pass through it. The shuttle crossed the event horizon at 1847 hours station time. After that, time was not the relevant measurement. Inside was not inside. The spatial logic that governed everything outside the wormhole, the logic that said here and there were different places, that before and after were different moments, that a being occupied a position and moved from it toward other positions in a sequence, that logic did not apply here. What applied instead was presence. Riddick was present. Everything else was also present. The distinction between Riddick and everything else was not gone. He was still himself, still the specific individual who had been born on a destroyed world and had survived everything subsequent to that destruction through the specific combination of capability and refusal that was the architecture of who he was. But the distinction was less absolute than it was outside. The light's the light that the wormhole showed from outside. The tunnel of it, the impossible color of physics doing something that physics was not supposed to do. And it was also not a tunnel, not a color, not a spatial phenomenon at all. It was a state, a quality of existence. The prophets were in it, not in the way that things were in places. They were the state. Riddick had been in situations that exceeded his processing capacity before. He had been in them enough times to have developed the specific discipline of continuing to function when the situation was beyond his models, rather than waiting for the models to catch up to the situation. He applied this discipline now. He looked at what was there looked back. They spoke in the way that Sisko had described, not in language, in moments, in the specific images of a consciousness that experienced all time simultaneously, presenting the sequential being in front of it with the shape of what it was. The first moment they showed him was Furia, not the destruction of it. He had never seen Furia. He had been taken from it before memory, before the specific age at which experience began to accumulate into the substance that a person was built from. He had carried the fact of Furia his entire life as an absence, as the specific negative space of something that should have been there and was not. The prophets showed him Furia as it had been. He looked at it. He looked at his people, the Furians, the specific physical architecture of them, the specific quality of the culture that had produced him. He looked at them with the Furian eyes that saw in darkness and understood, for the first time, why his eyes were what they were. Because Furians had always operated at the edge of what was visible, had always been the people who saw in conditions where other people were blind. He looked at his people and understood what the previous Lord Marshal had understood, millennia ago, when the prophecy came to him. A Furian would destroy the Necromonger faith. The previous Lord Marshal had interpreted destroy as in through violence. The prophets showed him what it actually meant. Destroy as in render unnecessary, make obsolete. The way a truth destroyed a lie, not through force but through presence. The Furian who would destroy the Necromonger faith was not a warrior. He was a non-believer with access to the truth. The second moment was the Underverse.
Okay, I need everybody to pay attention right here. Because this next reveal completely changes what the Necromongers have been fighting for since the beginning of their history. And trust me, the answer is not what I expected.
Not a vision of it. The thing itself, presented in the way the prophets presented things, which was directly and without mediation. The Underverse was real. It was not a place. It was not an afterlife in the conventional sense of a location where the dead went. It was the state that the prophets occupied. The state of existence outside linear time, outside the spatial constraints of the universe. The state of being that the Forerunners had called the Domain, and the Necromongers had called the Underverse, and the Bajorans had built a theology around without naming directly, because the prophets did not name themselves. It was real. It was also not the destination of the march. The conversion process, the half-dead transformation, did not move the converted toward this state. It moved them toward a biological approximation of proximity to it. A reduction of fear, a reduction of pain, an extended lifespan. These were the biological shadows of what the state actually was, the way a photograph was the shadow of a person. The march had been moving toward a photograph for centuries. The photograph was real. The person in it was not reachable by marching. The third moment was Riddick himself. The shape of him, complete. The way the prophets experienced complete things, the entire sequence of what he was from the moment of his birth to the moment of his death, which the prophets could see and which Riddick experienced as a shape rather than as specific information. He did not learn when he would die. He learned the shape of the dying, the specific quality of how his existence resolved. And the shape contained something he had not expected. It contained the fleet, not as a thing he destroyed, as a thing he turned. The prophets showed him the shape of Riddick turning the Necromonger fleet, not through violence, not through religious conversion, not through anything that the previous Lord Marshals had attempted, or that Vako would recognize as leadership, through the specific mechanism of the truth. The map is wrong, not the destination. The map. He came out of the wormhole at 1923 hours station time. 36 minutes had passed outside. It had not felt like 36 minutes. He brought the shuttle to DS9's docking port with the specific quality of someone who was doing a task that required precision and was giving it precision, while simultaneously carrying something very large in the part of him that was not doing the task. Sisko was at the airlock. He had said he would be there. He was there. Riddick came through the airlock and stopped. He stood for a moment. Sisko looked at him, not asking, reading. The way he had learned to read people who had been inside the wormhole, who had been in the prophet's presence, who were carrying the specific quality of someone who had been shown the complete shape of themselves, and were still integrating what that meant. You saw them, Sisko said. Yeah, Riddick said. What did they show you? Riddick looked at Sisko, at the man who had been shaped by the prophets into something he had not planned to become, the emissary, the figure of religious significance to a civilization that was not his own, the man who had been inside non-linear existence and had come back carrying it into a linear life. The Underverse is real, Riddick said. It's what your prophets are. It's what the domain was. It's the state of existence outside linear time. He looked at the viewport, at the wormhole, at the fleet beyond it, at the armada that had been marching for centuries toward this specific truth. The theology is right about the destination, wrong about the path. Sisko was quiet. The conversion process, Riddick continued. The march, the converter kill doctrine. None of it moves the Necromonger fleet toward the Underverse. It moves them toward a biological state that resembles proximity to the Underverse the way a map resembles a territory. His voice was flat, not the flatness of someone managing emotion, the flatness of someone delivering a fact that he had integrated and was now presenting. They've been marching for centuries in the wrong direction. Not wrong destination, wrong direction. How do you get there? Sisko said. Actually, how does a civilization reach the state the prophets occupy? Riddick looked at the wormhole. The prophets didn't show me that specifically, he said. They showed me the shape of what I need to do. He looked at his hands. They showed me that the march stops, that the fleet turns, and that the turning is what makes it possible, not immediately, not in my lifetime. But the turning is the beginning of the actual path, as opposed to the path the theology describes. Sisko looked at the wormhole. You believe them, he said. Riddick was quiet for a moment. I've never believed anything, he said. Not once. Not in all the time I've been alive. He looked at the wormhole, but I know what real is, and that was real. The command ship received Riddick's return at 1931 hours. Vako was on the bridge. He had been on the bridge for the entire duration of Riddick's absence, which he had used with the specific purpose of a man who had seen the shape of what was coming and had been preparing the command structure's response to it. The fleet's senior commanders were present. The theological officers were present. The specific architecture of a Necromonger leadership gathering that was not formally a challenge, but contained the complete structure of one. Riddick came onto the bridge. He looked at the assembled leadership. He looked at Vako. Vako looked back at him with the expression of a true believer who had decided that this was the moment. Lord Marshal, Vako said. The title delivered with the specific quality of someone using it as punctuation rather than address, marking the beginning of something rather than acknowledging something. The fleet awaits your command. The Underverse proximity instruments are at their highest recorded reading. The wormhole is before us. He looked at Riddick. Lead us through. The bridge was quiet. Every officer present was quiet in the specific way of beings who understood that what happened in the next 60 seconds was going to define everything that came after it. Riddick stood at the bridge's center. He looked at Vako. He looked at the theological officers. He looked at the fleet on the display. 8,000 ships, millions of warriors, a civilization that had been marching for centuries and had organized every aspect of its existence around the destination it was marching toward. The Underverse isn't through the wormhole, he said. The silence that followed had a texture. Vako's expression moved, not dramatically, in the specific controlled way of a true believer whose framework was being challenged and was marshaling its defenses. My lord, the instruments are right, Riddick said. The Underverse is real. The signal is real. The wormhole connects to something that exists in the same state as the Underverse. He looked at Vako directly. It is not the Underverse. The beings inside it have been in the state the Underverse theology describes for longer than the Necromonger civilization has existed. He looked at the fleet on the display, and they showed me what the theology gets wrong. Vako looked at him. You entered the wormhole, he said. Yes, and the beings inside it. Told me the destination is real, Riddick said. The map is wrong. The words landed in the room the way a specific kind of blow landed. Not the blow that knocked you down. The blow that made you reconsider everything you were doing that led to being in this position. Vako looked at him for a long time. His hands were at his sides, still. The specific stillness of a man who was doing the most difficult thing that certainty could do. Hold its position against the specific force of a truth it had not been built to receive. The faith he started. The faith is real, Riddick said. The voice he used when he was saying something he had thought about completely and had arrived at the complete version of. The Underverse is real. The powers the Lord Marshal carries are real. They come from proximity to a state that actually exists. He looked at Vako. The theology is right about all of that. He looked at the fleet. It is wrong about what the march is for, Vako's jaw set. The specific set of someone whose framework had found its boundary and had decided that the boundary was not movable. The march does not stop, Vako said. His voice had the specific quality of a statement being made as doctrine rather than as argument. The Lord Marshal who says the march stops, who says the faith is wrong, forfeits the throne. That is the law. I didn't say the faith is wrong, Riddick said. I said the map is wrong. His eyes on Vako. The Lord Marshal's eyes, the silvered eyes that had been inside the prophet's presence and had come back carrying something that was now visible in them in a way it had not been before. The specific quality of someone who had been proximate to non-linear existence and had returned to linear time with the residue of that proximity. Those are different statements. You are saying we stop, Vako said. You are saying we do not convert. You are saying the doctrine. I'm saying the doctrine has the right destination and the wrong vehicle, Riddick said. I'm saying that converting civilizations and destroying the ones that refuse doesn't move us toward the Underverse. It moves us away from it. He held Vako's gaze. The beings inside that wormhole have been in the state we are marching toward for longer than we have been marching. They did not get there by converting anyone. The bridge was absolutely still. Vako looked at Riddick with the expression of a man who had built everything he was on a foundation and had just been told the foundation was not wrong, was real, was solid, but that the structure built on top of it had been oriented in the wrong direction for centuries. It was, in its way, a worse thing to hear than being told the foundation was wrong. Being told the foundation was wrong was an argument. Being told you were right about the foundation and catastrophically wrong about everything built on it, that required a different kind of reckoning. Vako looked at his hands. Prove it, he said. The voice of someone whose faith had found a demand that it could make, not rejection. The specific demand of a belief system that required evidence. Riddick looked at him. He extended his hand. The Lord Marshal's power, the ability to project the spiritual form, to reach beyond the physical, the specific ability that derived from Underverse proximity, activated in the way it had always activated, but differently. The prophet's presence was in it now. The contact with nonlinear existence had changed the calibration, had sharpened the instrument in a way that the instrument had not been before. The air above his extended hand held something visible, not a threat, not a weapon, a demonstration. The specific demonstration of someone showing a room what proximity to the Underverse actually looked like from the inside, the luminescent quality of it, the specific color that matched the wormhole's interior light, the same color as the artifact's secondary energy signature, the same color as the Forerunner Domain interaction readings that Roland had identified. The theological officers looked at it. They looked at Riddick. Their instruments, running continuously, were showing them the same reading they had been showing since the wormhole opened, the highest Underverse proximity signal in the fleet's recorded history. And its source was not the wormhole. Its source was the Lord Marshal. Vako looked at the reading. He looked at Riddick. Something moved in his expression, the specific movement of a true believer encountering evidence that his framework was not designed to process and finding in the processing failure, not the collapse of the framework, but the beginning of its revision. He looked at the display, at the fleet, at the wormhole, at Riddick. He said nothing, which was, in Vako's language, the closest thing to acknowledgement that acknowledgement could produce without becoming surrender. The halt order went to the fleet at 2012 hours. Not a permanent stand-down, not a doctrinal revision. The specific order that the Lord Marshal had the authority to give, and that the law required the fleet to obey. All conversion operations suspended. All military engagement posture stops down. Fleet holding current position pending Lord Marshal's further orders. Riddick gave it in the flat voice he gave everything. Vako did not countermand it. The fleet held. On the Enterprise E, Picard received the halt orders communication and read it twice. He looked at Worf. Worf looked at the display. It held, Worf said. The voice of a Klingon who had run military assessments his entire career and was now running the assessment of a situation resolving in a direction that military assessment had not predicted. For now, Picard said. He looked at the Armada. What we have is time. That is what we have. He looked at the wormhole. The question of what we do with it is going to be the work of. He considered the scale. Years, at minimum. The Klingons will not be patient for years, Worf said. No, Picard said. They won't. He looked at the Armada. Which means the diplomatic process needs to produce visible progress quickly enough that Chancellor Martok's patience doesn't expire before the process does. He looked at Worf directly. I'll need your help with that. Worf's expression was the expression he had when given a task that was harder than a fight and required the same quality of commitment. Understood, he said. Lasky and Master Chief stood at the Infinity's forward viewport. The Armada was visible, 8,000 ships, holding position, the specific held position quality of a fleet that had been given an order it was obeying, but had not been given a reason it had fully accepted. Chief looked at the Armada. He had been in the Covenant War. He had fought beings who believed completely in a theology that turned out to be built on a lie. He had seen what it cost to dismantle that belief, in lives, in years, in the specific expensive process of a civilization discovering that the thing it had organized itself around was wrong. It's not over, he said. No, Lasky said. The halt holds until it doesn't, Chief said. And when it doesn't? We're here, Lasky said. Chief looked at the Armada, at the Infinity's position relative to it, at the math which had not improved from the strategic standpoint. We're here, he said. The Arbiter came to stand beside them. He had been in the meeting on DS9. He had heard Riddick's account of what the prophets showed him. He had been quiet through the account with the specific quality of quiet that he had developed over years of being the person in rooms who had been inside the thing being discussed and had learned that presence was worth more than commentary. He looked at the Armada, the Covenant, he said, his voice carrying the weight it always carried when he said that word, the history of it, the cost of it, the specific thing it had been and was no longer. When I learned the truth, when the foundation was shown to be wrong, the Army did not simply stop. It fractured. Some accepted. Some did not, the ones who did not. He looked at Chief. We fought them. Chief looked at him. Yes, the Arbiter said. We did. The Armada held its position. The wormhole pulsed, the irregular pulse of nonlinear beings expressing themselves in a linear medium. The three of them watched it. Riddick stood at the command ship's viewport, alone. The bridge behind him was operational. Officers at stations. The fleet managed, the halt order implemented. The specific machinery of 8,000 ships running in standby rather than in march. It was the first time in the fleet's recorded history that the machinery had run in standby. He looked at the Armada, at the civilization he had inherited by killing its previous leader, at the millions of people aboard those ships who had been converted, who had given up everything they were for a theology that was right about the destination and wrong about the direction. He thought about what the prophets had shown him, the shape of his existence, complete the way they experienced complete things, the fleet turning, the turning being the beginning, not the end, the beginning, the actual path, as opposed to the path the theology described. He thought about how long the actual path took, about how long beginning lasted before it became something else, about all the things that could go wrong between the beginning and whatever came after it. He thought about Vako, about the fleet commanders, about Dame Vako, who had been quiet throughout, who had been filing everything, whose specific quality of political intelligence he had been tracking since the moment he took the throne, because political intelligence at that level was the most dangerous thing in any room. He thought about the 4 words she had transmitted. He did not know who she had transmitted them to. He intended to find out. He looked at the wormhole, at the pulsing light inside it, at the truth that was real, and the map that was wrong, and the specific distance between knowing the difference and being able to use that knowledge to turn a fleet that had been marching for centuries, in the dark between all the universes that had ever existed. The most dangerous thing was not the fleet that ate worlds. It was the man at the front of it who had stopped believing and had started thinking.
Man, that ending hit way harder than I expected. Because Riddick didn't defeat the Necromonger Empire. He didn't destroy it. He didn't conquer it. He did something way more dangerous. He made it question itself. And honestly, after everything we've seen in Halo, Star Trek, and the Riddick universe, that might be the hardest battle of all. So now I've got a question for you. If you were standing where Vako was standing, would you follow Riddick? Or would you challenge him and keep the march going? Drop your answer down in the comments because I genuinely want to know. And if you enjoy massive crossover stories where ideas can be more powerful than entire fleets, you're in the right place. Until next time, Stay curious, keep asking what if, and I'll see you in the next crossover.